it continues to happen over and over where we serve people. We serve our customers, we serve our fellow brothers and coworkers, and we serve our families. And we do it not because we have to, because we say, oh, our culture is servanthood. We do it because that's what we're supposed to do. That's the right thing to do.
Welcome to another episode of the Culture-neer podcast. I'm your host, Terry Gwaltney, and today I'm joined by my good friend, Devane Prince, and we're going to discuss all things culture today. Devane, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
It's going to be a lot of fun. You know, there's a generation of entrepreneurs and business leaders out there right now that they're impacting the world in a positive way through the culture that they've created in their organization. And today I hope that we can inspire our audience to look at their culture with a fresh perspective, kind of see all the possibilities that a healthy culture can give you, because changing lives through our work and influence, I think it's a passion for both of us. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I would definitely agree.
I think that's one of the things that gets me excited about, getting up and going to work every day. I can't remember who said it. It's a very old quote, but, find something you love and do it, and you'll never work another day in your life. And I really feel that way. I mean, there's days, obviously, that you're dealing with stuff that, you hadn't planned for. Yeah. It's not necessarily what you get excited about. That's just a part of work. But day in and day out, for the most part, I'm excited that I'm pursuing a passion that I feel like has purpose and gets through the rough days.
Yeah.
But man, what a sense of fulfillment that I'm not just trading my time for dollars. I'm trading my time, for impact and influence. So I'm sure you feel the exact same way.
Yeah, that changing lives through our work and influence, that's something I've had to work on. I think initially I thought it was like you change lives through maybe when you go to church and then you go to work and you're these two separate people. Mm-hmm. But I think working in a good company with a good culture can show you kind of how to meld that together to where you are just yourself every day. And then you kind of get that composite feeling. And then it's easier to start growing in it because you're not compartmentalizing work, life, purpose, money. It's all part of one life you're living. And that's when I think the opportunities really start to grow. And you start to see people in problems that those people are having as a potential, you can be a solution for it, and you have a time to speak into their life, not only with their immediate problem, for instance, in my line of work, roofing, but just in general, spiritually, physically, with their family, really getting to know them and realizing that, hey, that's one of God's children, and there's not an accident. I'm probably here for a reason, whether it be to help them fix their roof or to pray for them. And when I started, I got empowered to do that and be that way throughout the entire day. That's when I feel like I could really start walking in my purpose.
Yeah, that's so good, because I've seen so many people through the years, like their faith was so important to them that they felt like, man, I'm on fire with my personal faith. And so I want to make a difference in my, journey through life here. And so they were on a pursuit to get out of their work environment and try to get into a church staff or something like that, because honestly, they felt like that's the only way I could do something significant with my faith. And I've seen so many people try to make that path, and they cleared everything out of the way to make it happen, only to find out that really wasn't what they were called to do. They left their purpose kind of all along the way. Because if you think about it, I mean, there's so much influence that we have in our daily work life, that can kind of be traded away when you're put in an office in the same group of people, maybe that actually believe the exact same way you do. Anyway, it's just interesting. And there's so much talk out about work-life balance, and it really is work-life integration. There's not two Devanes or two Terrys. It's just like, that's who we are. Yeah. And it's just a matter of, where are we, and being the same consistently. Anyway.
Yeah, I'll never forget. Before I worked for Integrity, for those of you who don't know, I do work for Integrity. I was kind of contemplating that path. Like, do I need to work at a church? Do I need to do that so I can speak into people's lives? And I remember God kind of in a very kind way that he does rebuked me and said, if you're not speaking and praying for people into people's lives now, what makes you think you're going to do it when you're on a church staff? Like, it's like, oh, there you go. The opportunity is already there. So if you just start to live it, then those opportunities begin to present themselves more and more.
Yeah. Yeah. So today, let's talk a little bit about culture, because I think it's one of those like big words. There's certain words you can use and they're just so big and people resonate with it, but yet kind of hard to fully understand it. I think if you hear the word culture, like, yeah, that's important. But then you ask 10 people to define what it is, you probably get 10 different answers. I want us to talk a little bit about that today, because I think not maybe having a clear understanding of what that means for me and my organization can kind of paralyze me. It's almost like paralyzed by analyzing. Yeah. Like, I don't know what to really do next, so I'm just kind of stuck here not doing anything. I don't know what to do with that. How would you define a strong culture, and why would you say that that's so crucial for organizational success?
Yeah, I once heard a football coach, he was talking about looking for a quarterback to draft. And he said, they got to have that it factor. And he's like, you can't describe it, but you know it when you see it.
Oh, that's good.
And that's really what I think about with culture. It's so hard to define it because there's so many things that go into it. But for me, I think it's almost the guardrails as to how you live your life. So it kind of points you to the direction you need to go. For instance, where I work, I think it's really about servanthood and character. So where we work, I think it really boils down to, like, we are encouraged and we have a culture, or we have a propensity, or it continues to happen over and over, where we serve people. Mm-hmm. We serve our customers, we serve our fellow brothers and coworkers, and we serve our families. And we do it not because we have to, because we say, oh, our culture is servanthood. We do it because that's what we're supposed to do. That's the right thing to do. And then everything else can flow from that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And I think you're right. The it factor, that's a great way to say that, because I think all of us have experienced good culture, and we may not have tagged it that way, but it's like, man, there's something about, I want to continue to patronize that business. That person at work, they just really love their job. You hear things like that, but what people are really saying is they just tapped in and experienced that culture, and they liked what they felt. And then conversely, the flip side of that is when you are interacting with someone in a customer service role that obviously does not like their job and is not valued, on their team,
right?
You're feeling the exact same thing too. And so you kind of begin to recognize good and bad culture, I think, just through experience. And I love this quote. The guy that started the Airbnb, he said, a company culture is the foundation for future innovation. And he said the entrepreneur's job is to build the foundation. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, maybe, we get hung up on, there are so many hats you have to wear when you're starting a business. It's like, I wish I could be a specialist, but I have 7 different things to do, and I can't afford to hire the other 6 people to do them. So I'm doing all of it. And I think you start having these conversations about culture, and people's minds immediately go to something that's hanging on a wall. Yeah, I know. Vision statement, that's important. Core values, yeah, that's important. Mission, yeah, that's important. But payroll this week is far more important. I got to get payroll done, or I've got to deal with this guy with an HR issue. And, I've got customers that are blowing up my phone, and, I'm trying to figure out how to spend time with my family. So I know it's important, but it's not that important. But the reality is, I think what he's saying is, now with a very successful business, is culture is not something we do when we get to a certain status in our business and then go to tweaking it. Culture needs to be something that's the foundation of everything that we begin to build on. Otherwise, you can build really, really quick, and if you don't have a really good foundation, the whole thing can just blow apart.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah. When I initially started really reading a lot about culture and stuff, and thought about it from a business perspective, which I don't have that actual firsthand knowledge, as I've never owned a business, but I thought it was more the icing on the cake. But as I've gotten to know it more, reading your book, getting to know you more, reading more on culture, it really is that foundational principle. Yeah. So I just think as a business owner, you have to wear so many hats and do so many things that when you're pulled away from your business to focus on one issue, that culture can be the momentum that can carry that when you're not there. And it's hard to get the truck started when you're pushing it. But once you get it rolling and you got some momentum, then it allows you to pull back and take care of those other things while your company culture kind of is that catalyst to continue shooting for your mission.
Yeah. And I think it's important when we talk about momentum. I think one of the crucial errors that we can make as leaders in whatever we're leading, for-profit, nonprofit, is that we'll get an idea, and that idea is kind of associated with the direction that I want to end up seeing my organization go to. And we'll talk about it for 4 or 5 months, and then we'll replace it with another idea. And we'll quit talking about the thing that was really the main thing. Mm-hmm. The problem is when we do that is we begin to lose the momentum. And so it's super important, I think, if you understand that culture is the foundation, you never stop talking about it. You may repackage how you do it, but you're looking for opportunities to be able to insert that into the story that you're telling with all the people that you're leading. So you're keeping that top of mind. And that really is the only way that you can begin to kind of build that momentum. And, if you're aspiring, business owner, entrepreneur today, or if you're a parent, you can relate to that because you look for opportunities to tell a story when you're parenting your kids, because there's just sometimes that you realize it's not effective to say no because I said so. Mm-hmm. And so you begin to tell the story behind of what that could cost you and the time that you got hurt and how that can bring pain, into your life and so on and so forth. Hopefully then that they can embrace, the message that you're giving them. Yeah. And, keeping that forefront is so crucial, to keeping momentum. And it takes a lot of hard work.
Yeah. I got a question for you. As someone who's got a company that has a good company culture, that has that momentum, what was the hardest part? Maybe if there's somebody who's getting started or wanting to start a business and they say, how do I get those wheels rolling? Like, what was the hardest part, or what did you wish you knew about starting that culture to get that momentum going initially? What's the most important, would you say?
Well, let me back it up and say, I think here's a starting point. From the day one, we had a vision statement and a mission statement. So I knew that was important. I knew it was important to have one. I knew it was important to talk about. But I didn't have a full understanding of how do I take what I know and execute on that. Yeah. And I think we can apply that in all of our lives. Knowledge is power, but, the momentum doesn't start until you're executing on what you know. Some of us know a whole lot, but we're doing very little with what we know. Yeah. And I think that's probably the area that I should have focused on more. When I really began to wrap my brain around, okay, well, we have core values. We don't have core values just to say that's what we believe. And when you look at that, that's what we stand for. It was more important than that. I'm trying to scale a business. And so, if people interacted with me and the first 2 people that were in our organization, they would experience exactly that because we cared about the same things. We provided service at the same level. We were on the same page. You hear that a lot. Yeah. That's a lot more difficult when it's 10 people and 12 people. Yeah. 20 people and 30 people, 30 people and 40 people. And I think when I begin to realize, how do I take that and make that a part of the decision-making process for everybody in our organization, I think that was the turning point. Yeah. So the vision statement wasn't just something on the wall we hope to accomplish someday. No, hey guys, every decision we make today is because we're headed there. Yeah. How we do it, that's the mission. This is how we're going to do it. And those core values, and when you're out there in the heat of the moment, you're going to process through those values to make that decision. Mm-hmm. So
that's good.
That was probably the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people get hung up there too, because you can't scale that across people unless you're willing to talk about it. Yeah. Often and in creative ways. So,
do you think sometimes companies outgrow their culture? Maybe they grow too fast before they've got it established?
Yeah, I do. And I think you keep backing up what, I was saying is because then the next aspect of that is if I'm very clear on what my values are and where we're going and how we're going to do it, I'm very clear on who I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult to hire people and hope to change their character where they share your core values.
Yeah.
And I think we spend more time in our organizations hiring people that we think that we can help us today and less time thinking about how they could hurt us in the future because they don't have the values that we have.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
I
Takes
think,
a long-term perspective, really.
well, it does. And I think, back to how we started this, I think this is why this stuff is foundational. It's much harder to turn a culture with 10 people than it is to figure out what that culture is with 2 people. And like, okay, now I'm adding to that.
Yeah.
Because now I'm doing it strategically. You go turn in the ship when you get a revelation and you've got 10 people, there's probably everybody's not going to make the turn with you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's a decision that they're going to have to make. I think it's on us as a leader to try to coach them up. But the moment they're taking more away than what they're adding to the culture, then you've got some hard decisions to make. Some people just are not willing to do their part to be coached up.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're bad people. They're just not a good fit. And that's where they probably need to be promoted to be a customer, instead of being a colleague.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm big on quotes, and I wanted to talk about this because I thought this one was so good. Jack Welch, he used to be the CEO of GE, and he had a big turnaround, had a lot of influence probably a decade ago. But he said this, he said, there's only 3 measurements that tell you nearly everything you need to know about your organization's overall performance. Their employee engagement, the customer satisfaction, and cash flow. And he said, it goes without saying that no company, small or large, can win over the long run without energized employees who believe in the mission and understand how to achieve it. And there's so much packed into what he just said. And I don't care if you're a for-profit or a nonprofit. There's a trend in the nonprofit world to have satellite locations and to multiply. But it's, all the same principles are still underneath that. You have to be able to scale that.
Yeah.
Just like any good business, I can run a great pizza business, but I'm the one cooking all the pizza, and I'm, doing all the direct hiring, and I'm there managing all the employees, and I'm dealing with all the customer complaints. I can kind of have a really good handle on what that experience overall looks like day in and day out.
Yeah.
But the moment I open another one across town and I can only be in one place at one time, I have better spent a lot of time on the culture and investing in the people, and they have a very clear understanding that they're going to act in my absence the exact same way that I would act.
Yeah.
Again, take it back to parenting. I mean, what are we trying to do?
Yeah.
You're trying to pass on values to the next generation and raise the people in your home to be leaders. And I think if we have that mindset more so that I'm here to keep them alive and out of jail and for 18 years, and then they're out of my house, the expectations would change.
Yeah.
And I think the end results would look a lot different too.
Wow.
Why do you think culture, as we're talking about this, why do you think that's so important to an organization? Because you worked in more than one organization, and I'm sure some of them had better culture than others. Why do you think that's so important?
For me, I'm pretty results driven as a person, and I've always been try to be a high achiever. I try to set whatever there is out there to achieve at the job, I'm trying to get it. But those opportunities and the awards and bonuses, they only come around every so often. And you can only win so many of those before you start to realize that, hey, this isn't filling any void in my heart. I thought that bonus was going to be the one that really fed that part of my soul. It didn't. Oh, I won this trophy. I still feel empty on the inside. And I continued to do it. And then I started to realize that maybe there's something bigger than just, winning a trophy or just winning that competition or contest between your employee or my other employees or colleagues. And I think that's where culture comes in, because then you start to find a purpose, that you realize that you're not doing this for the money. Obviously, we're in this to make a profit as a business, or maybe not if you're a nonprofit, but you're fulfilling a purpose. You're fulfilling something bigger than yourself. And when you're doing that on a day-to-day basis, it's not just about the bonus checks, or it's not just about the salary. It's about the influence and ways you're changing people's lives around you. And you get to see that firsthand. That's when it really becomes fun. And that's when you really engage for the right reasons, not just for some carrot you're chasing into the future.
Yeah. There's kind of a switch there where it's not just all about me. It's about us, not just selfish, but selfless. It's something interesting that takes place there. I'm curious, working on a team, I think it's so important to connect purpose to whatever the individual job description is to the person coming in any organization. Talk to me about that a little bit. In other words, if you were just going to hire somebody and you're like, we need to get this job done and this is what it pays and there's a good retirement plan here and you'll love the people you work with. Yeah. That's one thing. But if you bring someone in based on what you just said and you're able to tie purpose to whatever that role is you just hired them, talk to me about how that looks different or how that feels different, or just speak to the audience about that a little bit, because we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but retention is so important. Yeah. And people in this current job climate anyway, they can go from here to there and just kind of bounce around and try new things out. And if that costs an owner a lot of money when people transition. They say sometimes it takes 2 years to be able just to recoup the initial investment. So talk to us about the importance of connecting purpose to employees, because you hit on a little bit on yourself a while ago why that was important to you, but talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's important to let them know they're beyond just a certain task, because there's some people that would work in a factory every day and go in and just fulfill a task and go home, and that's fine. But I think in today's age where it's really hard to find good employees and even harder to keep those good employees, that if they're just filling a task, that void's going to start to come up in most people, and they're going to start to realize that they want something more. So obviously you're hiring them to do that task or whatever that may be. But I think it's really important, and one thing you do really well is showing them how that ties into the bigger picture of the purpose of the organization. I even think back to the Bible. It talks about how the body of Christ is many different things. Some people are the hands, some people are the feet. But it's easy, even in that perspective, from a spiritual perspective, to look at your neighbor and be like, man, he got that gift. Like, I don't get to do that. But what you're doing is just as important. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the whole body of Christ and you see the kingdom of God being hopefully unveiled on earth, you can see, okay, there's a bigger thing to this than just myself. Like, what I'm doing is important, but what he's doing is important. And when we all bring that together and fulfill that purpose, that's when I really think it's much easier to be engaged and to stay engaged and to want to continue to be a part of that, regardless of the ups and downs of the job. Maybe the salary's not as high this year, or maybe you didn't get the bonus this time, but it doesn't matter, because the goal at the end is to change the world, or to fulfill this purpose. Yeah, that's good. I remember we had a gentleman on the show not too long ago, and he owned a couple of Chick-fil-A's. And one of the things when I first heard him speak that caught my attention is, they're primarily dealing with high school kids, that are coming in. And they had all those kids create a mission statement for their life. Wow. And then in their onboarding, they would spend 2 hours with them connecting the job that they were just hired for and how that fit into the purpose of the overall organization. So you think about, how do you talk to a guy that is breading chicken in the back every day for 2 hours about the purpose and how important that is in our organization? Yeah. But they did that with each individual that came on board. And I think, when we're talking to, folks today about their organizational culture, it's hard work. You have to be intentional about that. It's like when you hire somebody to do the role that you're doing to help you, whatever that is. It could be in the office, it could be in a field, it could be in a construction environment. You have to slow down your productivity and show someone how to do what you're doing less proficiently, while you still have the responsibility to get your job done, which now is taking probably twice as long, right. Which is why a lot of people, they're not really good trainers because they can't make the shift. And it's kind of the same thing when you're talking about, culture, driving home purpose. That takes an investment of money. That takes an investment of time. There's other things that I had to do, but you have to deem that was important enough for that person that you just hired to get it. Yeah. That is an investment that in the long run, they're going to buy me that time back and some more, which is really why you hire anybody. You physically can't do it, and you believe, I'm going to spend money investing in a person that is going to allow us to do more. And at the end of the day, there's going to be a net profit that's going to come from that. And so I think if you're listening today, you've got to switch from, that costs me so much money, that costs me so much time, and look at it as, no, this is an investment.
And so you're investing in that now in the hopes of the return in the future. Yeah. And that culture you have to feed constantly. And I think that, probably the leader's most important responsibilities is to create culture where people from all different backgrounds thrive together. There's not a lot of benefit sometimes in hiring people that are exactly like you. Yeah. You'll be super strong in the areas you're super strong in, but you're going to be super weak in the areas that you're weak in. Yeah. And, man, that's so crucial. And again, if we flip it back to parenting, I can have 3 different kids, which I do, and they all 3 have different personalities. Yeah. And so how you're going to relate to them, just like 3 different employees, is going to be totally different. Message will be the same, but how you deliver that as a leader and fine-tuning that, that's going to take a lot of work. Yeah. I think a lot of times we as leaders in our organizations, we are the lid. We're not willing to continue to invest to grow because you can look like, well, I have a certain degree of success there, but, yesterday's success, tomorrow positions you for second place. Yeah. So elaborate, if you would, a little bit on maybe just the role of leadership in driving and sustaining, cultural change, because again, it's not a one-time deal. Yeah, no. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. I believe someone way smarter than me said that. But as a leader, especially when you're driving culture, I think it's really important, and something that is done really well where we work, is that leaders will never ask you to do anything that they themselves either haven't done or wouldn't do. So that's big, because there's no one bigger than a certain task, whether it's take out the trash after a meeting or, get on a Zoom call with the CEO of a company and talk about a major business move. So I think that really ties into it. But also just how that organization is structured. Are your employees designed to serve you, or as a leader, are you serving your employees? Mm-hmm. That's good. It's that upside down kingdom that you look at in Christ that I think is the model. Because I think if you look at Jesus, he's the ultimate leader. He's the benchmark. He's the standard that I like to look at. He came not to be served, but to serve. And the more you grow in leadership, the more responsibility you have, because you have more people underneath you that you're inevitably serving. And I think that you have done a great job, especially in our organization, embodying that, but also communicating that intentionally, where it's not just happening by accident, but we know is, hey, if I want to be a leader, I better be ready to serve more people. Yeah, that's good. I'm reminded, I've got an 11-year-old grandson, and of course, our family is so absorbed in our business. They get excited every time they see a truck and they see a sign or they see a television commercial, because they feel like it's a part of them. It's just the life that they've known. And it's kind of like our culture, the same we all do, We get excited when we see certain aspects because it's a big portion of our life. But I realized when I would have conversations with him, like, he would make comments about being a leader, and he was associating being a leader with seeing me sitting behind a desk. Mm-hmm. Or, I want to be able to tell people what to do. And I'm thinking, ooh, this is sounding very unhealthy. So this summer, actually, we employed him a couple of days a week to work out on the farm. And I would take him to work in the mornings, and my conversation with him was like, this is not about the task you're about to do today. We have people that do that. This is not about you earning extra money, although you will. This is about you learning responsibility and learning how to lead people one day. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying a while ago. People are going to have a whole lot more respect for someone that has been in their shoes. And I got into the whole servant leadership kind of thing. And it was funny, 2 or 3 weeks into it, his grandma asked him, so what do you think about it? I said, yeah, I like it. He said, what do you like most about it? He said, I like the rides to work with Papa. Wow. And he said, well, why? He said, well, we talk. Yeah. And she said, well, like, what do you talk about? He said, like podcast stuff is what he equated it to. But I was telling him, like, this is what an employer is going to look for. Yeah. They're going to watch how fast you walk. If you walk slow, then you're going to work slow. You talk slow, you're probably going to work slow. If you're not detailed and they got to go back and tell you 2 or 3 times the same thing, that's an issue. Yeah. when you're done, you go find that person and ask them, what else do you have for me to do? You don't go find a place to kill time.
Yeah.
And you're not taking an iPad or a phone with you, for all these reasons. Anyway, he was getting that. And I think, as leaders, we do have to lead by example. And I think, we're always up against what people perceive. I'm always nervous when we're hiring, I'm interviewing somebody and they tell me how they want to be a leader. So the next question is, well, why? Because I want to know, what does that definition look like to you?
Yeah.
And super, super important. I think probably the two biggest challenges that organizations are dealing with today is recruiting and retention. We have such a low unemployment rate, and we have such a what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe lack of ambition, in our society today, and work ethic, because we haven't trained that. We've allowed devices maybe to train our kids. We've longed for them to have a better life than what we had, but then we robbed them from the things that caused us to be successful, which was responsibility, which was hard work. And I want the next generation to be, better than, to live better than what we did, but, not at the expense of learning what that took, so they could appreciate it. We've talked with our kids who all have some kind of role, their families in our business, and most of them hope that their kids don't grow up and become a part of our business. Yeah. It's not because they don't love our business. It's just, there's a lot of us that work here as family, and, you have to work at that. But one of the things that, all said, is if one of them, that really is their skill set and that is their real passion, the requirement is they're going to go work somewhere else for a few years. Yeah. So when they come back, if this is really where they're supposed to be, they're going to have an appreciation for a culture and for a work ethic, and they'll have to earn, that. And so I think we got to have that kind of intentionality, not just with our employees, but, just as parents, growing up, because as you mentioned earlier, this is not a compartment of our life. We're dealing with people's lives, so we're impacting and influencing every aspect of their life. Yeah. What happens at home as well as what happens at work. So I think this is the new battleground for organizations right now. It used to be, how do I come up and how do I spend money on advertising, and how can, what is the cost of a customer acquisition? Today, it's as much, if not more, about how do I find that new employee? Yeah. What is the strategy for that? And fortunately, we have a great team, but, we're sitting here today and we still need more people. Yeah. What do you think about that? How important do you think that is in the society in which we live in?
Yeah, I don't know how many times I hear a day, people don't want to work anymore. Like that is something I hear all the time when I'm discussing with customers or at church. And I don't know when that happened, but it definitely has become more evident in the last few years. Yeah. That's what I just think recruiting is so big, because I think you said, you're limited on your growth by the kind of people you can bring in. Because if you start bringing in the wrong people just to fill a seat, then your culture starts to waver, and the culture is what got you there. Yeah. So I've been approached multiple times by people asking if we were hiring, and I always ask why. Because it's not that they're seeing an ad on Indeed or they're seeing a help wanted sign. They're seeing me and they're seeing my colleagues and how our lives look, and they're like, "Man, I want that look." They look like they're happy. It's because we are. Obviously jobs have challenges and there's good days and bad days, but they can see the investment that you've made in us as employees, I believe, and the investment that the company makes as a whole. And they're like, man, I want to be a part of that. I don't know about being a roofer, but if I could work for that company, I feel like I can grow. And I think that's the ultimate compliment of your culture, is that when people see it, they want to be a part of that.
Oh, yeah, that's good. And I think that's so, you can have the best ads out there, but man, if people you're trying to recruit talk to one of your customers while they're waiting for their interview, or they happen to see them out, or they know that they work there and they get the real insight on what it's like to work there, it really doesn't matter. You're not going to seal the deal with that. Yeah. And so, yeah, super, super important, I think, to have a healthy culture. So if you're listening today and you're wondering, that sounds like that costs a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of hard work, you're absolutely right. Yeah. But I think the real question you should ask yourself is, what is it costing you if you don't have a great, healthy culture? Who is not joining your team that you need today? because they're not attracted to your culture? Who's leaving your team today because they're not bought into your culture? Who's out there on a job site that's not giving 120% a day because they're not engaged, because for them, they're not on a mission. They're just there for a paycheck. I think when you begin to have a healthy culture, you unite people more around purpose than you just do a paycheck. And that therein becomes the game changer. And I think, the only effective way to really measure culture, the metric on that is you measure it through people.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like what you're saying. Talk to us, talk to the business owner that's out there today about the relationship between company culture and customer satisfaction. Because I think, again, let's awaken the minds of some of the people that are listening today with a new perspective on how important this is. It's not just about your customers or your team enjoying where they work. Yes, that's part of the goal, but there's a byproduct and a benefit of that, and I think it speaks to this question: the relationship between company culture and customer satisfaction.
Yeah, that's so good. I go back to what we talked about at the beginning, where you're not work Terry and church Terry, but you're just Terry. It's all integrated. Yeah. So I think if you look at your company culture apart from your customer satisfaction, your customer experience, then that's what you're already kind of missing it.
Yeah.
Because that customer experience is going to be a reflection of how happy and how much culture and how engaged your employees are. Because at the end of the day, it's a relationship. It's a one-on-one interaction. And if that employee is not engaged and happy and finding purpose, regardless of, he could say everything perfect, but that person's gonna feel it. Your vibe attracts your tribe, and so
that's good.
And so they're gonna attract when they're putting off that energy of we're here to serve you, and not just because we have to, but because we want to. People are gonna like that because it's gonna be so different than what they're seeing.
Yeah,
at so many different places.
Yeah, it really does begin to give you a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true, because the customer experience, guys, will never be greater than the employee experience. So you think about that. When you're experiencing that bad customer experience in your personal life, that's usually from an employee that is not engaged, that doesn't feel valued, and that doesn't have a good experience at work. And that's the bleed off of that. So what advice would you give to the next generation of leaders just on maybe building and nurturing culture?
That's tough, because I feel like I'm still at just the ground level. There's just so much more to learn. First off, it starts with you and how you lead yourself. I think one of the biggest things that was a turning point in my career was I'd read a book by Jocko Willink called Extreme Ownership. And in it, he talks about taking ownership regardless if it's your fault or not, essentially. And I started to look at all those things in my job at the time that I was complaining about, and things that I thought it was other people. And I began to start to see that all those things were under my control, or it could at least be influenced by me.
That's good.
And then that's when you quit being a victim and you can start making positive changes and say, okay, well, this person, my project manager, didn't put the patio furniture back. Why didn't they do that? Well, did I talk to them? Did I say, hey, we moved this? Did I have a good picture of it before? Did I explicitly say, hey, they're very particular about how their stuff's put back, so let's make sure we get it put back? No. I just assumed they would do it, and then they didn't do it, and now I'm mad at them, but I didn't take any ownership. That's just a small example. But I think that is the biggest one. So taking ownership, and then once you take ownership of your own of yourself and your own actions and abilities, I think being intentional with it. Like, okay, so now that I know that I have control, I have influence, now what am I going to do to grow? Am I just going to read the book? Am I going to listen to the podcast? That's a start. But am I taking notes? Am I putting it into action? Is it actually just, am I changing how I live based on this, or am I just listening to self-help stuff for entertainment?
Oh, we're back to the execution thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's important for everybody to realize you can't make excuses and progress at the same time. It's going to be one or the other. And so the moment you owned that, you eliminated the excuse and you started making progress.
That's so good.
And
I think one other thing I want to add to that too is look around. Who are you surrounding yourself with? I have grown more in my leadership and growth as a father and a husband in the last 5 years, and I have been way more intentional about who I spend my time with. So there's some people in seasons of your life that you might outgrow them, and that's okay. You have to let it go, because I always want to be in a room with someone who's way beyond where I'm at. That way I can start to ask them questions, because I want to get to where they're at. And you don't get to where they're at by hanging around with people that are below your level. And that's not to judge anybody.
No.
Because I do think as a leader, you also want to have someone underneath you that is coming along that you can see yourself in. Absolutely. And you can help bring along. But the people I've surrounded myself with and been intentional about that has changed my life exponentially.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard this a long time ago, and it's so true. If you continue to find yourself in a room where you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're always going to have people, like you said, that you're going to invest in. But if you're not putting yourself in a position to be around people that are further ahead of you, that are teaching you something, and a lot of times we don't do that because we've become arrogant.
Yeah.
It takes a certain degree of humility to continue to ask questions of people when other people are looking at you like, well, you already have a certain degree of success. Yeah. And if you can put that aside and position yourself to be around other people, wow, that's a game changer. I think culture happens, because leaders either intentionally create it or it just happens organically because the people on your team create it. And I think that's important for those that are listening today. It's like, well, someday I'm going to get to that. Well, I can tell you someday is right now. Yeah. I mean, your culture is being created right now. It's just a matter of whether you're the one creating it. And if you don't like the culture you have, go look in the mirror, because you own it. You're the only one that can really change it. Yeah. Because, you're the architect of the future for your organization. You should have a vision of what that looks like in the future. And in the beginning, that only lives in your mind, which is why it becomes what we call a vision statement. Now I want to tell people what I see for the future. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell them over and over and over again so they can get excited about where we're going. I don't know about you, sometimes what we're doing today is just not all that sexy and exciting. But if I can tie back to that purpose, I'm breading this chicken today, because someday I'm going to own my own Chick-fil-A. Yeah. Someday I'm going to be so successful at this, I'm going to get promoted to the next task and then the next task. And I'm going to catch somebody's eye, and it's going to open an opportunity for me. And when I do that, and, I'm going to have enough money to be able to impact and influence my family, my community. And again, it's all tied to something bigger. So it motivates me through the mundane. I think it's just super important. Culture is such a shared experience, for the people that work together, because it really does encompass everything we believe, our values, our language. That all becomes the norm of the organization. So if you're wondering today about how healthy your culture is, go back and just pay a little bit of attention. What do you feel like is the belief system of your people, when it comes to your business? What do you feel like is their values? So if you're in sales, then it's more about how can I sell more product and less about, telling the whole truth the entire time. Yeah. I think that gives you insight into, like, what are your values? What is the language that comes out? Do you hear more selfish language, or do you hear more selfless language? Yeah. Do you think about that as a person of faith, and if you're around church people, you have a lot of attenders, and then you have people, that consider themselves part of that church family. Mm-hmm. You can listen to the language and begin to hear where people are at. When they're inviting others to go to church, you got to come over where I'm going. Mm-hmm. Or they say, you got to come to my church. Or, this is, what we do over here, when it goes from me to we, internally there's been a buy-in that this is about us now. And it's the same thing. If you'll listen to your people, this is, where I work, and that's how they do it. Or, this is where I work, and this is how we do it. Yeah. Oh. That language is internal, and it just begins to, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Yeah. It becomes an indicator of really the inside condition of where somebody's bought in or not. Mm-hmm. And you can listen to your culture, and probably really, really quick, you can begin to, to size up, the areas that you need to work on, or the areas you're doing really, really good in. So culture is really about it's it's all about what we have in common.
Yeah, when you said out of the heart, it also makes me think of where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. So what are you treasuring? Are you just treasuring the bottom line? Are you just treasuring that big sale? Or are you treasuring that company culture? Because then your heart can follow it, and then it all else flows from there.
Yeah, that's good. How important would you say companies' mission, vision, and values are to aligning with its culture? I mean, how important do you think those three things are to have that culture that produces a highly engaged employee? I mean, that's a big topic. Just jump in there wherever you want and speak to that.
Yeah. There's so much there. So, but I think we're talking about guardrails, like, especially as you're growing, and it's a couple people, it's easy to be on the same page. But as you grow to 10, 20, 30 employees, you're going to have those written down things to reference back to. And even for yourself, sometimes, you might find yourself in a situation like, what is our mission here? Our mission is to serve people with character and purpose. Yeah. So I'm going to do what's right. I'm not going to do a half truth and slide it by them because I'm having a slow month. Or am I going to serve them with character and purpose and do the right thing, whether someone's watching or not? So I think that's really big. And then I know you are really big on continuing to cast vision. But even in the Bible, it says, write it down, make it plain so people can run with it. And so whenever you write that down, and people can kind of, like you say, it comes from this is their mission statement to this is our mission statement.
Yeah.
Now you got people building it with you instead of you building it and that you're just hoping they join along. And I think that's when it really starts to grow. But you got to have it written down. You got to have it for that reference to remind yourself.
Yeah, that's good. If you think about in the old school days, I'm showing my age here a little bit for everybody that's, post iPhone here or post Atlas. You used to have a map on a piece of paper and an atlas. And when you traveled before you had a phone, you would see this is where I want to go. And that map would be lit up with all different colors of roads that would go everywhere. And you had to kind of pick which one was going to get you there the quickest. You were talking about guardrails a while ago. I think that's your vision, your mission, that stuff. That's what those become. They become a roadmap to where you're going to end up because every day I've got a choice. I'm going to make this turn or that turn. And back in the day, I didn't have a phone that would say, well, if you go this route, it's going to be 1 hour and 30 minutes. If you go this route that appears to be a little closer, it's going to take you 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I didn't have a satellite giving me all that information. Mm-hmm. I had a piece of paper that I was looking at, and every decision that I was going to make was going to determine how long it took me to get to my final destination. And you can spend a lot of time getting behind a wheel of a car and driving and just go north. Yeah. But it doesn't mean you're going to end up where you want to end up any quicker. And I think that's where your vision, that's where your mission, and again, like you were saying, that's where your decisions, you start making those decisions processed through that information that you have diligently over and over again, cast that to the people that are working for you. So again, they know what's important. Mm-hmm. It's what's important to them is what's important to you. Where you're going is where they're going. The decisions and the values they have are the same ones that you. So it doesn't matter. In your absence, you're going to make the same decision. And again, I think that's why culture is so important as we're talking about it today. I think any good leader starts with the end goal in mind. It's a picture, of what the future is going to look like. And so if you haven't decided today what you want your cultural organization to look like, that's where you need to start, because this is very, very foundational. It doesn't mean that it's elementary. It means that it should be some of the first things that you do because it's that important. And again, I said it a while ago, but you are the architect of the future of your organization. If you're the CEO, if you're the founder, if you're the entrepreneur or the solopreneur, what that looks like lives in your mind and no one else's. And so you've got to see it first if others are ever going to follow it. And then these things that we've been talking about over the last few minutes, you've got to come up with those creative ways to take what's in your heart in the direction you're going and be able to communicate that in an effective way. Because listen, if your dream is no bigger than, if it requires only your participation, you're not dreaming big enough. Yeah. And so I'm going to have a team to be able to do that. I'd like to kind of just land this thing over the next few minutes, just really quickly, because I'm going to give you some stats, because I think this is super important if you're listening today. 1 in 4 workers in the United States describe their current workplace as toxic. Their culture is toxic. And you think about that. That's 25% of the workforce is miserable because of where they work. So the next time you go to a restaurant and you have 4 people sitting over there, one of those guys are miserable, and they're miserable because of where they work. It's not necessarily what they're getting paid, but they're miserable because of where they work. How do you think their attitude is when they go home? Yeah. Do you think that can contribute to this 1 in 2 divorce rate failures in the home? Man, if I live in an environment all day that's toxic and I don't enjoy the people I'm around, and what I get to do and the people I'm around just agitate me all day, probably real difficult for me to flip that switch and become a different person when I go home. There's a residue of that is following me home. So in light of that, I would say building a culture that attracts the kind of people that we want on our team would give us a competitive advantage, wouldn't you?
Yes, 100%.
So MIT did a survey, and they said that 20% of employees have left a job because of their culture. So that's 1 in 5. And replacing an employee can cost organizations up to twice the employee's annual salary. So just these 3 different numbers that I've given you today should be motivation for you to begin to level up on your knowledge of culture, figuring out the pulse of the culture of your organization, educating yourself on what you can do to communicate value of your team members. And I would just ask, just in a simplistic way, how would you answer, what does a healthy culture look like?
I think a healthy culture is a place where you can go and be yourself completely and grow into that best version of yourself. It's that fertile ground, if you will, that when planted there, you're going to produce fruit in your life personally and for the business.
So that culture actually makes you better.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think there's times where maybe where you're struggling and that culture can pull you out of, like we're talking about momentum. That culture is going to help you see beyond that present circumstance, which may seem dire at the time.
Flip side of that, what does a toxic culture look like to you?
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you started talking about the word toxic. When I think of a toxic culture, I think of one that the first thing that comes to my mind is like gossip and negativity. Those are, I think, byproducts of a toxic culture. But it makes you not want to be there. It's one of those places where you go because you have to, but not because you want to. And then from that, your whole attitude just changes. I mean, even if you're there and you're trying hard, but you don't want to be there, but you need the paycheck, that's going to start rubbing off. And then once you have that vibe and several other people around you do, like you said, there's a residue there. And that cancer can start to grow, even if it isn't manifesting yet in the negativity or the toxic or even poor language or whatever it may be. It's there, and it's going to continue to fester, and it will start manifesting itself in different ways.
Yeah. One of the things that I would say about that is if you're listening today and you're doing that evaluation, I guess is the best word, of your culture. So, sometimes I think we know things aren't right. We know a person is overly negative. We know they're not engaged. We know that they're just not really healthy to the culture. One, I think sometimes we don't understand the impact and influence that person can have on the organization you're trying to build and all those other people that have signed up to go with you. But I think the other part of that too is sometimes it's like, depending on your personality, it's like, I don't really want to deal with that, because of how it makes me feel. It's going to be an awkward conversation. I'm not going to walk away from that, feeling the greatest. I know they're not, but at the end of the day, it's really more about how we feel than it is the person that we're talking to. That motivates generally our decisions. I wrote in the book, and I encourage you guys, if you're listening, you haven't got this book, I wrote a book called The Culture-neer. And a lot of the subject matter we're talking about today, we talk about in the book in greater detail. But one of the examples that I used is when I was growing up in rural America, every kitchen had what they called a potato bin. Did you have one of those when you were growing up?
My grandma did.
Yeah. So, there'd just be this little wooden box, and, your potatoes would be in there, and generally they'd come in a 5 or 10 pound bag. And you could keep potatoes in there for a long time. I've seen them in there so long they actually begin to sprout, where you could go out and put them back in the ground and, they would form a potato plant. But man, you talk about a smell that was so putrid that you would put your hand out there and try to pull out a potato and find out that one of them had just went to complete mush, almost liquefied. That smell is like something I can't even begin to describe. And here's the danger. In that, if that potato was left in there to that point to begin to rot, every potato that come in contact with it, the longer you left it there, it would begin to infect all the other potatoes around it. And left over a period of time, you'd have to throw everything else out. And that is such an example, I think, of culture. If you have a person that you just don't want to deal with that person and you know they need to be dealt with, you've tried coaching them up, they're not responding, it's really a paycheck for them. Maybe they think, you couldn't replace me because, my position is so specialized. I don't care that, that I don't really respect you and that I don't really care much about this place. And I sure don't care about these people that I'm working with because I'm smarter than all of them. Yeah. But you can't get rid of me because I'm so important. And you keep a person like that along, that begins to leak into all of the other employees that you have. And eventually, if you're not careful, you have to start with a completely clean slate. So you need to ask yourself when you're doing that evaluation, you need to have a long-term perspective of the future, because I promise you it is going to be much easier to have to deal with one or two awkward conversations with people that they're just not going to change than it is to have to go out and replace 10 people. Yeah. And when you don't do that, everybody on your team already knows that. So they know the person that shouldn't be there, and you're losing credibility and respect. Yeah. The more you allow them. And so it gets back to culture. Culture is what you create or it's what you allow. Question you need to ask yourself today is, what have you allowed and what needs to be changed? I'll give you a couple more numbers just to think about as we close this thing out today. Any kind of company that has a toxic culture, it's going to be so much harder to attract talent. And 73% of U.S. job seekers apply to a company today only if its corporate culture, get this, aligns with their personal values. Wow. So 3/4 of the people that are applying for jobs today in America only apply if they feel like that their personal values line up with the company's values. Wow. How many people are not even applying at your place because you don't even know what your values are? Yeah. Or you haven't publicly, proclaimed those in a way that you're attracting people that line up with what's important to you. So that should be a game changer. And three-quarters of the most disengaged employees are already looking for another job opportunity. So you do that evaluation of your culture, and they're disengaged. Statistically, it tells us 3/4 of them are already looking for another job. Wow. And it's not necessarily because of what they make or what they don't make. They don't like who they're doing life with. Yeah. They don't like how they're being treated. The loss of productivity, it says, costs companies up to 18% of one employee's salary each year. So if I have a person that is not as engaged as someone that is bought into the culture, they're costing me 18% more of their salary because they're not operating at peak performance. They're just kind of showing up and collecting the paycheck. And if those numbers aren't convincing enough, get this, 85% of CEOs and CFOs believe that a toxic work culture could lead to unethical or illegal behavior. Wow. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but what we're talking about is so important to the health, of an organization. And we started this all talking about how we are passionate about using our work and our influence to have a positive impact on community and society. That's what's at stake. Yeah. That's why this is so important. It's not just that you're going to have a more healthy bottom line, but if your bottom line was more healthy, and your mental state was more healthy, how much greater would you be a better dad? Would you be a better version of you as a husband? Would you be more apt to step up in your community and support and give back to things and try to make a difference instead of just trying to figure out how to keep your head above the water? Business owner, I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. Mm-hmm. So tell us what it means to you to be a culture-neer.
I think it means to continually grow in your pursuit of leadership and your culture building. So I think, you want to go. So we're all unique in our own ways. So God has given us, our own talents. And so you have value to add to any culture you're at. So I think you're going to have to kind of press forth and trailblaze, if you will, what is my position in this grander scheme of culture? Like, where do I fit? What piece of the puzzle am I that no one else can fit into that piece? And then once you figure it out, then grow in it and continue, and then multiply. I think find somebody that you can mentor and help bring them along. And maybe you see what piece of the puzzle they are and they don't yet, and you can help them find that out. And then you really start to multiply. And that's when I think true leadership really starts to happen.
Oh, that's good. Last question I'll give you today. What's one piece of advice you'd leave our listeners today on how they can improve the culture of their organization? They've done an evaluation. They want to improve it. Any one piece of advice that comes to mind?
I would just say, remember that your words hold a lot more power than what you maybe think. So it's one thing to get into a meeting and talk about casting vision for a culture and to say these things, but how are you going to react whenever an employee comes to you and says they made a mistake? How are you going to react when that customer calls and didn't have a great experience? How are you going to talk to that person who maybe needs off work for an extended period of time because of a personal issue? Not just the negative, but also, like, are you celebrating when there's things to be celebrated? I think how you carry yourself and how you speak every day is going to build that culture much more than if you just have a meeting and you get really excited about it for a week.
Absolutely. That's good. Man, I've enjoyed our talk today. I hope you guys listening today and gals that are out there, hopefully this maybe has inspired you to begin to look at your culture in a different way. Hopefully it's encouraged you to realize, man, the influence, the opportunity, and that you have on impacting those people that you're leading in the communities that you've been placed in, because that's really what this was all about today. Listen, if you haven't picked up the book, The Culture-neer, I encourage you to do it. We go, again, a lot more depth on this subject. And the whole purpose of that book was really to understand the responsibility you have on leading people that are on your team, but also the responsibility and opportunity you have to impact the communities that you're serving. And the stuff that we talk about is everything in between on really how to do that. So if you don't have a copy of that, there's a link in the show notes where you can go grab that on Amazon. I encourage you to do that. Remember, culture is what you allow or what you create. We'll see you next time on the Culture-neer podcast. Terry Gwaltney from the Culture-neer podcast. Listen, I want to say thank you for listening to the podcast today. I also want to encourage you to help us get the message out to more people. If you could like, share, and review this content on wherever you consume it, if you go into YouTube or LinkedIn or just whatever your social media channels are, and you could even share it, that would be a big help to us here at the Culture-neer podcast. Also, if you'd like some more information, you can go to www.terrygwaltney.com, where we have updates. We also have more resources. We share articles there. And you also can find our new book there called The Culture-neer. Again, we want to thank you again for taking time just to listen to the podcast or view it on YouTube. It's our goal to spend 20 or 30 minutes each time we're together to help grow your culture to a point where your employees refuse to leave and your customers can't resist. This is Terry. We'll talk to you soon.